Well, good evening, or good morning, or good afternoon, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for the event, and I welcome you. As always, we have a great webinar on tap. This one is going to be really interesting, I can tell already. But before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for our speaker, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your question, and we'll try to get to as many as we can near the end of today's webinar. Also happening at the end of the webinar, we'll be doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you'll be one of our 4 lucky winners. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is Don't Panic, Effective Incident Response. Our speaker today is Julie Gunderson, who is a DevOps advocate at PagerDuty. Thank you so much for joining me today, Julie. Really great to see you.
Well, thank you, Charlene, and hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. Well, it's tonight for me because I'm in Idaho in the US, and I'm aware it's morning for some and afternoon for others. I'm really excited to be here with you today. As Charlene mentioned, I'm a DevOps advocate here at PagerDuty, and you can find me at Julie_Gund on Twitter. And today we're going to be talking about effective incident response. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the history and introduction of incident response and establish some definitions and then people and roles and then how to be prepared for an incident and then not forgetting the postmortems. So when we talk about incident response, we want to make sure that we're all starting off on the same playing field. And so at PagerDuty, we define an incident as any unplanned disruption or degradation of service that's actively affecting a customer's ability to use the product. And many also look at their internal facing disruptions as incidents, and this could include a security breach or a loss of database or not being able to run a month-end accounting close. It's okay if your organization doesn't have the same definition as ours, as long as you have a standard definition that's widely used throughout your organization. You want to have something that is simple. It doesn't need to be overcomplicated. So whether you're experiencing a substantial number of failed transactions on your shopping cart page or a large increase in processing time for lineups in the store, or any other business metric that has deviated from normal behavior, this would be considered an incident as your service is impacting your business in a meaningful way. And with incident response, we want to replace chaos with calm. So how does incident response usually go in your organization today? Is it smooth and streamlined? Or is it a lot of people talking over one another? And we want to avoid that people talking over one another because panic and chaos isn't good. And during an incident, there's already that panic. And so the chaos only makes things worse and causes more confusion. So we want to keep things organized. And there's a saying that when your home is burning, to you, it's the worst day of your life. But to the fire department, it's a Tuesday. So how can you handle things that smoothly without panic and be effective? And so when we talk about incident response, we're talking about that organized approach to addressing and managing an incident, because the goal isn't just to solve the incident, but to handle the situation in a way that limits the damage and reduces recovery time and costs. So the key word is organized, and you'll hear me say that a few times. And it may surprise you that incident response isn't about solving the problem. You can give 1,000 monkeys a keyboard in enough time and they can solve a problem. It's about solving the problem quickly while minimizing the damage and reducing that associated costs. And those are our goals. And note that I don't just mean financial costs. There are costs associated with your employees, the people you're trying to help with your services and products, your reputation. And so to accomplish this goal, you want to mobilize and inform only the right people at the right time. And this engages the right responders and makes the resolution effort more efficient, driving down the overall time to resolve incidents. And you want to use systematic learning and improvement so that you can build off the mistakes you make and avoid making them in the future. And then lastly, use total automation. Don't rely solely on documentation that you have to look up or research when an incident occurs. With incident response, let's make the technology work for you by setting up the rules and actions to trigger automatically. And we'll talk about this in a little bit. So the basis for incident response isn't something we invented at PagerDuty. It's actually heavily based on the Incident Command System, or ICS for short, and that was developed after devastating wildfires in Southern California in the 70s. And what they saw was thousands of firefighters responded, but they found it difficult to work together. They knew how to fight fires individually, but they lacked this common framework to work as a larger group. So flash forward to some time, and there were some interagency groups that were created called Fire Scope, and then there was the National Incident Management System, and they use this incident command system. And so we've adapted that at PagerDuty to incidents on your systems. And so an incident is a serious or unexpected event that requires immediate attention or action. And the reason that this incident response process has been so successful, it's because we've iterated on it over time, and we continue to do so. We've used the basis of having an organized approach to respond to an emergency, and then we've tailored it to our needs because it creates that consistent and unified approach to responding to incidents. Now, all of that said, I haven't talked about a major incident yet, and that's because it varies between organizations. So our description at PagerDuty of a major incident is any incident that requires a coordinated response between multiple teams. So as soon as we need to involve others, we step up our process. And what I've talked about till now is just kind of a jumping off point to brainstorm with your team back at the office. So you just need to have a clear definition, much like that of an incident. And that definition, it should be a short, simple statement that makes sure everyone is on the same page, because you want to remove any discussion or disagreement around whether or not something is a major incident or not during your response process. So if you have a metric to use for when we experience more than 100 errors per minute, it's a major incident, that's great. It's a good idea to tie that metric to customer impact, like saying we're experiencing a major incident when more than 5% of our customers are affected. The reason this should be your first step is that you really can't respond to an incident until you know what an incident is. And so if one person considers something an incident, but the rest of the organization doesn't, it's going to create ambiguity and confusion during that incident response process. But having that clear definition, it's great. You also have to get it out to the entire organization to make sure that everybody has the same understanding, because that prevents that confusion. And we've seen that there are 4 commonalities of major incidents, right? Timing is a surprise. They happen with little or no warning. Major incidents aren't scheduled, and time matters. So you need to respond quickly. And the situation, it's rarely understood at the beginning of the incident. We don't know what all those contributing factors are. So you're going to encounter all sorts of bumps and turns. And then it's about mobilizing a team of the right responders to resolve an issue. Because I don't know about you all, but I think a lot of us have worked with organizations where all of a sudden you have an incident and either everybody's in the room or you have a Zoom screen with hundreds of faces on it. That's a very costly experience. You want to get the right people involved. And then typically, you can determine the severity of an incident based on how drastically your metrics are affected. As the traffic to your website drops, the severity increases. So, maybe it starts out as a sub 5 and within a few minutes it becomes a sub 4. And then traffic to your site is continually decreasing and the severity of the incident is escalating. And now it's a sub 3. So up until now, we have those incidents set to notify the on-call responder, but not to trigger a full-fledged major incident, bringing in the whole gang to coordinate the response. But let's say that responder starts working on a sub 3 and they notice the problem, it's only getting worse. And at some point you reach a threshold, something that splits an incident from a major incident. And for us at PagerDuty, that's the difference between a sub 3 and a sub 2. Once we pass that threshold, the lead subject matter expert triggers our incident response process right away to bring in more subject matter experts. They also bring in an incident commander, a scribe, a deputy, and liaisons, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. And that idea is to solve that problem in a way that limits damage and reduces recovery time and costs. And so you probably already have your own levels of priorities, and they might not be called severities. Maybe use P1 through P5 or different terms or emojis. That's totally fine. but a lot of the time you don't know the impact right away. So it's really important to be able to trigger the incident response process, even if a metric hasn't passed that threshold for a major incident yet. And so at PagerDuty, anyone can trigger the incident response process at any time. And we encourage automatic detection and triggering within our product wherever it can be done efficiently and accurately. And if an organization has reliable metrics that track customer or business impacts, such as loss of sales per minute or success rates of API calls, they should be able to leverage that knowledge to trigger the incident response process when that threshold is crossed, because that helps reduce the time wasted on human-based assessment, and it allows you to drive down that mean time to resolution. But not only do we automatically kick off our major incident response process based on metrics, we encourage our humans to do so too. And it's really important for us at PagerDuty because lowering the barrier to triggering incident response, it's actually led to a dramatic increase in the speed in which incidents are resolved. We don't want people to sit on something because the alarm hasn't gone off yet. If customer support starts getting a lot of requests very quickly, it's a good sign that something is wrong. So if an intern walks past a graph and thinks it looks wrong, we want them to be able to trigger the incident response process for a major incident. Now, this is how we let our humans trigger the process here at PagerDuty. We do it with a chat command. We use Slack, but don't feel like that's the only right way. I just want to show you how we do it to give you an idea. You can do it however you want. Use an air horn or a flashing light, whatever you need to do. The point is you want some way to trigger your response that's fast and it's easy and available to everybody. And once an incident is triggered, we need to switch our mode of thinking. We need that mentality shift. We want a distinction between normal operations and there's an incident in progress. We want to switch decision-making process from peacetime to wartime, from day-to-day to defending the business. And something that would be considered like completely unacceptable during normal business operations, such as deploying code without running any tests, might be perfectly acceptable during a major incident when you need to restore service quickly. So the way you operate and your role hierarchy and the level of risk you're willing to take, it will change as you make this shift. So as I mentioned the fire department before, the fire department is a parliamentary organization, so they use war terminology, but not everyone likes that. Call it what's right for you. Just separate these two times as normal and emergency, or okay and not okay. The important lies in that you have a differentiation to allow for a mentality shift in the decision-making process, not what you call it. And this is why we recommend using metrics tied to business impact. Metrics can be useful and often work best when they're tied to that business impact. So for example, a metric we monitor at PagerDuty is number of outbound notifications per second. At Amazon, it could be number of orders per second, or at Netflix, it's famously stream starts per second. Monitoring these important business metrics will let you then use the automation to determine the severity of an incident and the type of response you want to use. So if you use metrics that aren't tied to business impact, like CPU usage is too high on a host, then it's difficult and it's sometimes impossible to determine the severity of an incident associated with that metric. You want to use a metric that lets you know how your business is doing, not how a particular piece of equipment is doing. And during this mentality shift into emergency or wartime or not okay times, your role hierarchy and that level of risk you're willing to take, it's going to change. The responding teams, they need to have the ability to make decisions on their own to try and reduce the impact. So think of it like trying to reduce the spread of a fire. If you sit there and try to decide and weigh your options and you can't make a decision, the barn will be burned down before you know it. So in a sense, taking no action during a time of emergency, it is an action. And we call this decision paralysis. Making the wrong decision is actually better than making no decision, because a wrong decision at least gives you more useful information to work with, while making no decision gives you nothing. And so now let's talk a little bit about the people and the roles within incident response. So there's 4 steps of an incident, and we talk about triggering this at times of emergency. And this is the pattern we follow when responding to incident response. So we start with triaging, and then we work to mobilize. So when you're notified of an incident, you've got to assess it. You've got to triage it. You will want to assess the severity and the urgency, and then you want to get the right people who can work together and not have 100 squares on that Zoom meeting, because you want those right people to work towards that resolution, which then leads us to resolving, where we're all working towards that common goal to resolve the incident. And then that last step is to prevent the incident from happening again in the future. Now, in order for these steps to happen, we have to have the right teams and roles engaged. And so these are the roles we look at within incident response. And depending on the size of your department, the roles you can have engaged for incidents, it might vary. And so I'll talk about each of these different roles. So we've been talking about the incident response process so far. And in order to run really a proper incident response process, you really need an incident commander. And we consider that one of the most important roles during an incident. In fact, at PagerDuty, they are the highest ranked person on the incident response call. They are even higher ranked than the CEO. They're the single source of truth during that incident. They're the ones in charge. They make all the decisions, and no action is performed unless the incident commander gives the go-ahead. They're needed to help drive those major incidents to resolution and help coordinate that response. And the best part is they actually don't have to have deep technical knowledge. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. Next up, we have the scribe. And the scribe is present during the response to document the timeline of the incident as it progresses and make sure that all of the important decisions and data are captured for later review. And you can use a lot of different ways to record the incident response process, such as like a shared document or communication tool. At PagerDuty, we use Slack to keep that internal record of the major incident. And the scribe posts in an incident response specific internal public channel to record the live progress of an incident. That way, we have a solid history of what was discussed and the decisions that were made, and anyone in the company can go and read it for a status update if they'd like. So if you have Slack, I'd recommend you have an incident response channel set up for your department or team, or any other tool that you can have that, so that people aren't scrambling to try to find where this communication is happening. We also have the deputy, and the deputy is a direct support role for the incident commander. It's not a shadow where that person is just sitting there observing. The deputy is actually expected to perform important tasks during an incident, and depending on the size of the company, the size of the incident, that deputy can also support the incident commander to help keep them focused on the issue at hand. They can act as a scribe if necessary. They can also act as one of the liaisons. So it really depends on your organization. And then kind of talking about the liaisons, depending on the severity of an incident and the size of your department, we do recommend having both an internal and an external liaison. As you might imagine, these liaisons, they're responsible for communicating with both the company and the external parties and the customers that what the impact of this incident is. So here at PagerDuty, we use statuspage.io to keep our customers informed if we're handling an incident that causes a degradation of services. This is a great way to keep your customers up to date in real time. If I can say anything, don't keep your customers guessing whether or not there's a system that's down. We had a major outage of a telco today. We don't want customers to be guessing, is it down? What are they doing to fix it? How are they working on it? Keep those customers informed. And then moving on to the operations section, when an incident occurs, the on-call responder or the SME, the subject matter expert, they're paged first without alerting the rest of the team, so that they can assess the incident and decide whether or not they can resolve it on their own, or if the impact is too large, and if that business impact is too great and a larger amount of subject matter experts are needed, that primary on-call responder will page the on-call incident commander, and that starts the incident response process. And that operations staff, it may consist of one or more persons, depending on the severity of the incident, the size of the department, the number of teams. You may just need a single subject matter expert, or again, you may be working cross-functionally with other teams. And keep in mind that this chart, it'll shrink or grow depending on the size of the incident or your organization. I mean, we've seen some in organizations that take up multiple pages. So you can make this work for you. This is just how we do it here at PagerDuty. And you might be wondering, like, can you scale this? So maybe we have 6 or 8 different teams or squads, and you can scale this. So in a department that has maybe 5 teams, you just want to make sure that you have some things to set up to start with. An on-call schedule for the primary and backup incident commander. And remember, as I said, that person doesn't have to have deep technical knowledge, so that can actually be team agnostic. And you want to have on-call schedules for the primary and backup subject matter experts. And then also, having your marketing and support and legal teams on-call rotations as well is a great idea. And then you want to have that method of paging out to other team members. And so when we look at a typical sequence of events for an incident, when most incidents first occur, that on-call subject matter expert is paged due to the automatic detection of a problem. And in most cases, they'll acknowledge and solve the issue before it turns into a major incident. But if an incident worsens and becomes a major incident, an escalation will be triggered. And we use IC Page, and that brings in an incident commander, and they take control of that incident. They come in the room and they introduce themselves as, "This is Julie Gunderson, I'm the incident commander." They bring on the liaison team, and then depending on need, they'll bring on other subject matter experts. And so diving deeper into the role of an incident commander, I really want to talk about why it's so important. So as I've said before, the goal is to replace chaos as calm. Remember the firefighter analogy: for you, it's a bad day, for them, it's a Tuesday. That goes back to this replacing chaos with calm. We want that single source of reference. Even if you don't have a deputy or a scribe or a customer liaison, an incident commander is one you should get first after the SME who has triggered the incident. They're that single source of truth. They're the ones in charge. They're the ones helping drive it towards resolution. They're not actually working to resolve the incident. They're keeping that call focused on the goal. And then once we've made a decision, the incident commander helps us to gain a consensus for the plan. And even though I just said that the incident commander is basically a dictator and everyone should follow their instructions, we don't want people to come back later and say things like, "Well, I knew that wouldn't work." We want to make sure we stop this hindsight 2020 problem, because it unmotivates responders and it wastes time. But gaining consensus with a large group of people, it is hard. So at PagerDuty, instead of saying, "Does everyone agree?" and waiting for everybody to nod or type their confirmations, we say, "Are there any strong objections?" If no one speaks up, you can implicitly get the consensus of everyone in the room and quickly move on. And you can say, "Hearing no objections," then you have the opportunity to move on. That being said, after you've asked if there are any strong objections, we recommend counting to 7 in your head to give people enough time to talk. It's really no good asking if there are any strong objections and then just moving on. So do give people the opportunity to raise any objections. And then once we have a collection of actions and their associated risks, it's now time to make a decision. And sometimes there's an obvious path forward with one option being clearer or better, but sometimes you're presented with 2 equally bad options. And there's really no golden rule here I can give you. It'll be up to the context of your company culture. But my advice is, if you can't decide, literally flip a coin, because remember, making the wrong decision is better than making no decision, because you can't move forward without that information. And so making the wrong one will at least give you something. And if it turns out to be wrong, you can put your resources into the other option. The incident commander will also assign tasks to a specific person. So it's okay to assign tasks to a role like DBA on call, for example, but it must be a single individual. Assigning things to a group is a good way to make sure it won't get done. And we want to we call that the bystander effect, and we actually want to avoid it. They teach this in CPR training. If you're in a large group of people and somebody has collapsed, you don't say someone call 911. You point to a very specific person or say somebody by name and say you call 911. You don't want to wait for somebody else to do something because then it just won't get done. And as I've mentioned, the incident commander is the highest authority, no matter what their day-to-day role is. An incident commander still outranks everybody else in the incident response situation. And it's critical for successful incident response. And it does require buy-in from your executives. So you never want them to just find this out on a call. It generally doesn't work out well. You want buy-in. And whether this works for you, it's going to depend on your organization. This is how we do it at PagerDuty. It works really well for us, but I can imagine that it's not easy to get buy-in from this at every organization out there. Importantly, though, the incident commander isn't resolving the incident. They're coordinating and they're delegating all the tasks. They shouldn't be looking at logs or graphs. They shouldn't be logging into servers. They're there to help and delegate that call. And this can be really hard sometimes if an engineer becomes an incident commander, because naturally they might just want to jump in and try to help, but that urge just must be resisted at all times. And so if that happens, one of the things that you can do is bring in another incident commander, and I'll talk about that here in a little bit. As I mentioned, deep technical knowledge isn't required. So at PagerDuty, we did used to require that all of our incident commanders be experienced engineers with deep technical knowledge of all of PagerDuty systems, and it was actually one of our bigger mistakes. Remember, incident commanders aren't responders. They aren't the ones actually fixing the problem, so they don't need that deep technical knowledge. I mean, they should have a basic understanding of the organizational foundation and know who to reach. They're experts at coordinating the response, not at solving the technical issues. You should be relying on the subject matter experts for that. So once we removed the restriction of technical knowledge, it actually led to a dramatic increase in our pool of available incident commanders and didn't actually have any effect on our ability to respond to incidents. And now we have incident commanders from all across the organization, and we're constantly running trainings to train more. I mean, it's already hard enough to get people to want to be an incident commander, so adding unnecessary restrictions to your pool just makes it harder. And then we do encourage handoffs. We want to conduct regular handoffs. It's very important to ensure that the response continues to move smoothly and that there's only one incident commander on a call at the time. So depending on your organization, you'll have a different threshold at which you decide to complete a handover. Like maybe it's after the incident has been going on for 2 hours or 3 hours. Choose a time frame to hand that off. And in general, handing off command is really easy. You can privately message with the new incident commander. They can go ahead and read all of those scribe notes in the channel and get up to speed. And then you just hand it over and transition it. So you introduce the new incident commander and then jump off the call. And it's really important because you do want a fresh set of eyes on the incident to help navigate through the incident without those interruptions. And typically, the incident commander follows this feedback loop while communicating with the subject matter experts. And we just keep following this pattern until the incident resolves. You ask for a status update from the expert. You decide on an action based on what you're told. You gain consensus for the plan, assign the task out, follow up once the tasks are done, and repeat. And more generally, we're following this cycle for each incident. We size up the situation and stabilize things in that loop that we just showed and keep everyone updated on what's going on. Then verify the situation is fixed before ending the response. And that's very important. If it's not fixed, we start again. So just some quick tips for new incident commanders. You do want to introduce yourself on the call with your name that you're the incident commander. This is a psychological thing. Using your name here reminds people that you're human. You also want to avoid acronyms at all costs. They get messy and they end up wasting a lot of time, and especially if they're misunderstood. And try to speak slowly and with purpose. It's better to speak more clearly than worrying about being concise. On the call, kick off people if they're being disruptive and derailing the solution, even if it's an executive. And I'll talk a little bit more on how to handle that in a few minutes. And then time box tasks. So you want to assign tasks and then time box it, like DBA on call, 5 minutes, come back and let us know your status. And specifically assign those tasks to individuals to avoid the bystander effect. And remember, you don't need to have that deep technical knowledge to be an incident commander. And then once the situation is under control and that call has ended, you really need to explicitly declare that the response has ended, and it will be recorded by the scribe. And so the reason that that incident commander role is so important is it keeps everyone focused, and it keeps the decision making forward, and it avoids that bystander effect. And it's removing the chaos and keeping that incident response process organized. And so there are other roles. There's the scribe and the deputy that I brought up, the liaisons and the subject matter experts. And so we're going to talk a little bit about those. So as I mentioned, that deputy is a direct support for the incident commander. They're not shadowing the person. It's important to keep that incident commander focused on the problem at hand rather than worrying about documenting the steps or monitoring time box tasks. And the deputy does anything they can to help take some of the work of the incident commander off. So the deputy helps support the incident commander by taking on any of those necessary tasks with the goal of helping that incident commander stay focused on the tasks. So some examples of this might be like keeping time for assigned tasks, or circling back around to missed items, or paging other responders to join the incident, or doing non-technical investigative work based on the incident commander's input. They're also basically a hot standby for the incident commander should the primary incident commander need to be transitioned to a subject matter expert or otherwise have to step away from the incident commander role. They can manage the incident, and also they can help remove people from the call if instructed by the incident commander. Any incident commander can act as a deputy. Deputies do need to be trained as incident commanders so that they can take over that call. And then the scribe. As I mentioned, the scribe documents the timeline of an incident as it progresses and makes sure that all the important decisions and data are captured for later review. So I remember the very first time I scribed, and I tried to take notes verbatim, and it doesn't have to be verbatim. The scribe is expected to do things like ensure the incident call is being recorded and note in Slack, like I said, we use Slack here, important data, events, and actions as they happen. Specifically like key actions that are taken, and they want status reports when one is provided, and any key call outs during the call or at the ending review. And anyone can really act as a scribe during an incident. That role is usually assigned by the incident commander at the beginning of the call, or typically the deputy will act as a scribe until one is assigned. And again, the deputy can act as a scribe depending on the size of your organization or the size of your incident. The scribe also reminds the team to follow up on issues discovered during the incident in the form of to-do action items documented in the official transcript. And they should also monitor tasks assigned to responders by the incident commander to remind the incident commander to also follow up on those tasks if necessary. And then, as I mentioned, we have the liaisons. So the communications liaison or the external liaison, that's the link to your customers and stakeholders throughout the incident, because you want the command staff to be able to focus on the problem at hand rather than worrying about crafting those messages to the customers. You can have a combined customer and internal liaison depending on your organization, depending on the size of the incident, or they can be broken out into two separate roles. Customer liaisons generally work really well when they're a member of the support team, as they're already used to crafting those messages. Internal liaisons, it's really important that they know who to talk to in the organization, and they can give information to those stakeholders and also bring information from those stakeholders back into the incident commander. And we have seen some pitfalls with incident response, and I want to talk about some of those. So executive swoop. And we actually call it executive swoop and poop, but PagerDuty tends to get a little bit mad at me when I put that on the slide. Executive swoop is a common example of things that we see. And it's worth noting that executives don't do this maliciously. They don't join the call with the intent of hindering the process. They're actually trying to motivate people and find out what's going on. I mean, it is their business too. So making sure your executives understand why these things are a problem is important. So be sure to follow up after an incident if these things happen. So some common examples of executive swoop are, let's try and resolve this in 10 minutes. I mean, on the surface, it seems just fine, right? They're just simply trying to motivate the staff and encourage them to solve the problem quickly. Unfortunately, that's really not how people on the call interpret it. Instead, they're more like sarcastically thinking, well, you know, I was gonna take an hour, but since you said that, I'll just go ahead and do it in 10 minutes. This assumes that people aren't working as hard as possible to solve the problem, and it really demotivates responders and it adds additional stress. So the incident commander's job is to nip this in the bud and keep things on track. Or can I get a spreadsheet of all affected customers? It's definitely one I'm sure a few of us have heard in our careers. So that exec joins the call and they want that list of affected customers. The problem is, in order to find that out, you need to take someone away from the effort of responding to the incident at a time when they're needed the most. And it's okay to just tell executives that. Would you like me to get you that list or continue working on the incident? Give them the option. And then oftentimes executives will hop on an incident response call and begin asking a lot of questions around like a specific customer's impact. And they'll come in and they'll ask for something large or time consuming, and make sure, again, you can tell them, I can work on that or I can solve the problem at hand, but we can't do both. Now, if there's an executive on the call that is being particularly pushy and won't listen, a really easy way to nip this in the bud is just to say, do you wish to take command? And you can watch how quickly they do not answer with yes. Oftentimes they don't say anything or they say no, and that's great. Then you can move on with the call. But if they say yes, all right, you're off the hook. Everyone be advised, I'm handing over command to X, peace out. But again, most of the time they'll say no or they don't answer, in which case you can continue as normal and perhaps saying, in that case, remember that I'm the incident commander, please save your discussions for after the call. We see executive swoop happen because stakeholders haven't been notified. So if you keep stakeholders informed on a regular cadence, you will avoid a lot of the executive swoop because it ensures that people don't need to join that incident call. It allows your stakeholders to field questions from customers and then not bring them to your team, and it gives the organization the confidence that the situation is under control. And we've seen another anti-pattern being too frequent status updates. So I've seen this with some organizations that they want to update every 15 minutes, every 5 minutes. That takes responders away from resolving the incident. One of the things that we do here at PagerDuty and we recommend is to do internal updates once every 30 minutes or immediately when a status changes. And then red herrings, like these are things like clues that are misleading or distracting. Like I've been on a call where everyone was convinced that there was a network problem. However, after some time, we realized that we hadn't checked the recent deploys and the source of the problem was actually a code change, which, you know, they usually are. So don't get sucked into obsessively following one line of investigation and miss the true contributing factors to the incident. The incident commander helps by asking questions and encouraging the team to step back and look at the options. And so to kind of cover these anti-patterns, debating the severity of an incident during the call or discussing policies and decisions, that can happen because policy changes weren't disseminated. Hesitating to escalate to other responders. We have a saying here, which is never hesitate to escalate. Neglecting the post-mortem and follow-up activities. When you neglect that, you don't learn from the incidents and therefore you can't prevent them. And then trying to take on too many roles. Like I said, that incident commander shouldn't be a subject matter expert. They should be focused on bringing that call to resolution. And then getting the entire organization on a call. 100 people on a Zoom screen at 4 a.m. turns into a very expensive call, not just monetarily, but for people's sanity and with alert fatigue. And then also forcing everybody to stay on the call. If you don't need somebody on the call, specifically release them from the call. They can have the option to stay and listen, but do let them know that they can go. And assuming silence means no progress. Silence means that people are generally focused on the task at hand. And so preparing for a major incident, how do you do it? That's what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about now. So you want to create that standardized definition for things like an incident and a major incident. And going back to that definition of a major incident at PagerDuty, any unplanned disruption or degradation of service that is actively affecting our customers' ability to use the product. And as I mentioned, a lot of customers look at internal facing disruptions as incidents. Also, you want to practice running major incidents as a team. At PagerDuty, we run Failure Fridays, where we practice chaos engineering and we spin up an incident, and that helps the team to practice. And it enables those responders to act in that calm and collected manner so that you've gone through it before. You've built that muscle memory. So that way you're ready for when the real thing happens. And so a great way to practice, if you're new to this, if you have an incident that's downgraded in severity, go ahead and run through it anyway as a major incident, because you'll learn how your response process worked and you'll be able to tune your systems better so you aren't triggering major incidents out when they're less severe. And again, that's why we run Failure Fridays at PagerDuty. It helps keep us on our toes and ready to go at a moment's notice. And it's also a great way to onboard new team members. And then you're looking for process improvements, stakeholder expectations, and disruptions that may trickle down to responders or rise up to stakeholders. So find ways to tune your processes for your teams to work. You want to make sure at your organization that you own your processes and that they don't own you. And checklists. You want to have checklists. If you look, pilots, no matter how many times they've flown, they have a pre-flight checklist that they have to go through no matter what. The truth is, people make mistakes. It's in our nature, especially in high stress situations. And the best way to mitigate this risk is to have a checklist in place. And it also helps to work pause points in your process so everyone has a chance to just take a breath and continue to work in a calm environment. So here's an example checklist. I'm not going to read this entire thing to you. You can actually find this at response.pagerduty.com. You can download it. You can also go to community.pagerduty.com. It's posted in our forums. The key thing here is these may seem like really easy and simple steps, but in times of panic, they're hard to remember. So checklists reduce the strain on remembering small tasks that have a large impact. And don't neglect the postmortem. The person completing the postmortem, they will write a detailed timeline of events. They're going to run through the timeline of what happened during the incident response process. And this is where those scribe notes are very helpful. So you can actually learn more about blameless postmortems at postmortems.pagerduty.com. But just to kind of run over this, there's a few areas on the postmortem that you want to have. You want to have an overview, which is a high level impact of what happened. You are a high level, and then you want to go into the what happened, which is that detailed description, which is about 1 to 2 paragraphs in length. You want to understand what the contributing factors are. Many people call these the root cause or root causes. You also want to include what the resolution was and what the impact was. Who did this affect? By how much? For how long? And what went well? And what didn't go well? And action items. And if you don't have any action items, what was the point of having that response? You want to have your internal messaging and your external messaging in that detailed timeline of events. And I'm not going to read this slide to you, but here's a more detailed look at what you can include in your postmortems. The way we look at it is the more information, the better. That way, when you're looking back at this incident in the future, you have the entire context of the situation and can better understand why decisions were made. And now I wanted to take a moment to open it up for some Q&A for everybody here. We did leave some time for some Q&A and for the raffle for the Amazon gift cards. And while we have that Q&A, I did want to bring up too that if you want to find out more about incident response, the community and advocacy team here at PagerDuty runs PagerDuty Connects, and where we talk about best practices, and we are doing a virtual one on Thursday, February 25th. You can actually scan this QR code and be able to sign up and register for it.
All right, great. Yes, we have plenty of time for questions. So if you have a question for Julie, just go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel, and let's go ahead and dive into the ones we have right now. Here's a question for you. My organization does not formally practice incident response. So what do you recommend as first steps?
That's a great one, and that's one we actually get a lot as far as incident response is concerned. So really the first steps are going back to having those definitions there, because how do you know what an incident is unless you have it defined? We have seen it over and over again where organizations can spend the first 15 to 20 minutes on a call just debating that severity. So having that definition and having those severities understood, but making sure the rest of the organization knows that is a great first step. Beyond that, if you already have that, understanding how the incident response process goes to start out with, things that we look at when we're looking at the ROI of having an incident response process is, do you currently know your mean time to acknowledge or your MTTA? And do you have an understanding of your mean time to resolution? Because understanding what those are really helps you understand how having an effective incident response can drive those down. We do see a lot of times that within organizations, people don't even have a really well set or defined on-call rotation, or folks are manually going through manual spreadsheets. When you can remove that barrier, you lower down that time to resolution.
Excellent. All right. Next question here. We do not use PagerDuty. Can we practice this without using PagerDuty?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the reasons we actually, if you go to response.pagerduty.com, we talk about this more in depth and also offer some of our trainings. And we've tried to keep this not specific to PagerDuty as a process, so that anyone can adapt it to their organization. It doesn't have to be done in PagerDuty, or you don't have to use Slack like I kept bringing up. You can use your own tools. This is just more of an overall process.
All right, great. Okay, here's another good question for you. Do you think that PagerDuty is good for small teams as well? Although it's for good, I see it's a lot of work going into it, which small teams may struggle to keep up.
Um, that is a great question. I'm curious on the a lot of work part. Generally, once you get PagerDuty set up, it's pretty easy to maintain, but I would absolutely say it's great for small teams. One of the things that I actually took out of this presentation to make sure that it fit within the time frame of this DevOps.com webinar was how you actually scale this down to small teams. But when you are scaling down to small teams, the important things to have are those rotations, right? You want to have those on-call rotations. But furthermore, with PagerDuty, there's a lot of insights that are available that you can use to learn from your incidents. And that's one of the things when we talk about operational or organizational maturity is we see organizations that are reactive, and then we see organizations that are in this preventative state. And in order to get from this reactive state to this preventative state, you want to use some of these insights that you can learn. But even within a small team, if you're spending a lot of time just trying to get a hold of somebody, that can really exasperate that incident.
All right, great. We've gotten some really great questions in so far, but there is plenty of time still. If you have a question for Julie, just go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions, and we will just keep going until we are out of questions or out of time. Next question, when someone suggests to an executive that they have the option to take over, is there some level of support for the incident commander from human resources?
All right, that's a great one. And I have to tell you, looking back at my previous organization and maybe how they would have handled this, it gave me a little bit of anxiety to think about. So, like I said, it may not work for every organization. It's going to really depend where the organization is in their culture. But don't let the executive find this out on the call. That executive team leadership needs to buy into this process and be aware of it ahead of time, because then they're not surprised by it. And I don't know that I've ever seen it really go to that human resources level. I mean, that's why you are giving them the option to take it over, and they generally don't. And if it came back, and this is something that was widely understood and agreed to within the organization, then that might be easier to handle. I can say that we have some different incident response incident commander teams for other higher level incidents, and we don't put brand new incident commanders on those so that we have the option for them to not run into that fearful situation of how do I talk to the executive that I just met when I started here 2 days ago. I hope that helps.
Gotcha.
But
All right.
I can say it would probably be up to the HR of your organization if that's something that you felt would help.
Mhm. Okay. All right. Moving along. Next question here. Are there any techniques that can be used to ensure there is enough coverage in monitoring/alerting systems to catch major issues, similar to the idea of test coverage?
Well, one of the things that I would say is that's where the postmortems come into play. You want to go ahead and review those monitoring and alerting tools to make sure that they were alerting correctly. So if you come back and you have a major incident that maybe nobody noticed, nobody was notified of until 15 minutes later, what can we do to go ahead and tune our systems to make sure? And that goes actually back to updating your documentation and completing that postmortem so that you can make sure that these things get caught in the future.
Perfect. All right. Okay, next question here. We are using Kanban for ticket management. How different is PagerDuty compared to Kanban?
You know, I haven't used Kanban for ticket management, so I can't really differentiate those. However, we can definitely follow up with somebody from the PagerDuty team who might have some more information on that. So that's what I would recommend. Sorry, I don't have the greatest answer on that one for you.
All right, great. Okay, let's see. I think we have time for 2 or 3 more questions here. Here's one for you. When different organizations support a project, different area like DBA, apps, server, etc., do you feel a central tool, maybe the need for a central tool to organize it?
So that's why we use PagerDuty to make sure that you can bring the right groups. So you can bring that, you can page in that DBA team, you can page in that app team to go ahead and tackle that incident. Again, that's when we're looking at having that consistency across an organization. So I don't know if I'm reading that question 100% right, but we definitely look at PagerDuty as like that brain, that central hub to bring everybody in together.
Okay. All right, great. Okay, we have a we have a comment here rather than a question from Tom. He says 3 a.m. in the morning can create some unique personality conflicts. So well said,
No,
Tom.
there is something to that though. I swear it's 3 a.m. These things seem to happen at 3 a.m. But the unique personality conflicts, if you think about it, when you're new to incident response, I mean, you are woken up by some blaring alarm or a barbershop quartet from the PagerDuty app, waking you up, and it is your adrenaline is going and your blood pressure is up, and that's why we do encourage that practicing piece, because that helps at least keep the calm and remember how I mentioned muscle memory. Having that muscle memory and creating that is really important.
Well, I think 3 a.m. is when things get real, right? That's when you really see people for who they really are is at 3 a.m. So anyway, all right. Well, that is all the questions that we have right now. I'm going to go ahead and leave the question and answer period open for a few more minutes to see if we get any last minute questions in. And while we're waiting, just a quick reminder to the audience that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of the webinar, or if you just want to watch it again, you will have the opportunity to do so. We will be sending out an email post-event that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be living on the devops.com website, so you can go find it there as well. Just go to devops.com/webinars and look in the on-demand section, and it should be right there waiting for you. Okay, I know we do have one more question in here, but it's actually more of an offline question that Push Deep asked. So, Julie, I'm just going to make you aware that that is in the queue. And Push Deep, I know that somebody from PagerDuty will be following up to get your question answered to you. It's a not a technical question, more of a business related question. So we'll certainly have somebody from PagerDuty reach out and get your question answered. Um, okay, great.
I think
So,
I might have answered in
oh,
that, but
okay.
I'm
Well,
not
if you
showed up.
did in the queue, that's fine. But yeah, even if not, even if you did, PagerDuty will be getting a copy of
Thank you.
all the questions. So, all right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and close out the question and answer period now. So thank you to everybody who did submit questions. And like I said, I think we did get to all of the questions. If not, if we missed it for whatever reason, I apologize. But yeah, you'll get your question answered for sure. All right. Let's do the drawing for the 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, and then we'll call it a night. How's that sound? Sounds good to me, right? All right, guys.
Sounds fun.
And we can actually get to our evenings. Okay, so our 4 Amazon gift card winners. Our first winner tonight is Brenda. Brenda D. Congratulations, Brenda. Our second winner tonight is Rob H. Congratulations, Rob. Our third winner tonight is David N. Congratulations, David. And our fourth and final winner tonight is Chris K. Congratulations, Chris. We'll be following up with all 4 of you by email to get your gift card over to you. So please check your inbox. If you don't see anything in your inbox, please check your spam folder. All right, Julie, thank you. Great presentation, lots of great information, and I just, just enjoyed every little bit about that presentation. So thank you so much for bringing your expertise to today's webinar. It's much appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Great, great. Also want to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am signing off. Have a great day, everybody, and please stay safe.